Hello? Am I live? Are we here? How's it going? Can you hear me in the chat? Okay, cool. Hello again, Ariana. Hello. It feels awkward because I'm on a the streaming device thing, and then I'm not seeing the YouTube page. But let me make sure of something because I got to mute the thing over here. Yes, we'll do that, and we'll get started. How's everyone doing? Okay, cool. It's actually a go. Technology. Where are you all from? Let's just all say where we're kind of chatting in from if you feel inclined to do that. I am in that state doing these things. It's really nice out today. It's kind of 50s, sunny. No snow yet. I need a little bit of snow. Some of you might be sick of snow. Some of you might be hankering for it like I am. Happy Friday. Weird to do this on a Friday. I don't know if I've done this. I was thinking about doing this on one of the weeknights, but just the week kind of got away from me. Whoa! London, Ohio, Peru, Maryland, Toronto, North Carolina, working at Starbucks, kicking it at the Starbucks in North Carolina. Bless you. Lots of snow in here. Summer here. What else? What to talk about in this thing? We'll go probably like around till 5. I loved all your questions. I got them. I saved them. I didn't get to all of them. Some of them were not exactly answerable or a little bit too personal. So I kind of admitted some of those. But there's other opportunities to ask your question. I love this. How many of us are here? Let me go back to my YouTube page thing. 272. Wow. My brain can never really fully compute how many people show up to these things. It's an honor and a privilege, and I'm just blown away by all that. Hello, Catherine. I'm glad you're here too. Niagara Falls, Canada, New York City. It is freezing. My hometown of Boston. I heard anyone from Boston out there? What's happening in Boston? Because people were saying don't go outside today. East Central AL, you're a lifesaver. Thank you so much, Patricia. Crimea? Wow. What time is it in Crimea? Netherlands, Colombia, Bolivia. I love this. Iowa. Iowa isn't exotic to me as the other places that I just mentioned. So it's funny. Bolivia, South America. Iowa. As an American. Anywho, but I love Iowa. I love that you're in Iowa. I love that you're kind of checking in. Do you guys want me to just start with the questions and we'll get into it? Why don't we get into it? Oh, and at the end, I'm going to talk about my membership. I'll probably be talking about the membership thing as a resource through the questions, because a lot of the questions, sometimes the answer is the membership. If you can't have access to therapy, and if you need a community, or if you just need to feel like you're going to get going on something. If you're a member out there, raise your hand so I know that you're here. We just did a Q&A on Wednesday. Anyone here? Are you all Q&A'd out? Sometimes the trauma stuff can be a little bit tiring. I'm a little bit desensitized to it. But yeah. So sometimes it's too much. Anywho, all right. We all ready? I think we have some members here. Okay, let's just dive into it and get this thing rolling. We got a lot of questions to cover. All right. And I'm reading my questions off the screen. I'm not putting them on. And all these questions are going to be anonymous. And I have my good friend James. He's monitoring in the comments. And in case anybody gets nasty, lots of members. If anyone gets nasty or inappropriate, James will help kind of like navigate that. I love that he's here. Shout out to James. James is actually incredible. He is editing my videos. He is helping a lot with my YouTube account and going over things. I couldn't really live without him. I appreciate him so much. So everyone say a big kind of round of applause for James. And okay, enough with all that. Let's get to the questions. Where's my live stream? Okay. All right. How do you handle a mother who refuses to take responsibility? My mother or your mother? My husband's mother has never truly apologized or taken responsibility for any time she has been verbally abusive or manipulative. He and his sister both have told me they cannot remember one time she has apologized without somehow turning it back on them for being too sensitive or too dramatic. His sister has just gone no contact in part because of this, but also because their mom refuses to go to therapy. Right. She thinks it is all her kids being dramatic and selfish. Raise your hand out there if this is your mother, because this is actually a very common presentation within the toxic family, a narcissistic parent that really can't own anything. She just thinks it is all just her kids being dramatic and selfish, especially now being no contact means she will not be able to see her grandkids either. Let's see. How do you handle a mother who refuses to take responsibility? Um, I've been there. It's the major source of my recovery story. When I got into therapy, I would really start to was waking up to how bad it was, and I would have conversations with my mother about how bad it was. And even anytime my sibling and I try to challenge our mother in high school, middle school, or whatever, the response would be, I don't remember that. That never happened. So there's a bunch of ways that narcissistic parents or mentally, parents struggling with mental health can gaslight us and deny. They really do not have the capacity for a mature ownership. But here's the thing in this, how to handle it is um, in the inner adult, inner child framework that I do, usually our inner child thinks that there is a sane person in there that has the capacity to own something and be an adult and be mature when they don't. Your inner adult can start to embrace that they are really not safe to get into it with, but the inner child doesn't see toxicity. Inner children don't quite get personality disorders. They don't quite get narcissism. And they're always holding out for hope that someday that the toxic parent is going to become a loving person and come clean. What we're looking for is for this mom to have a moment of insight or hit a bottom of sorts and saying like, I'm just so devastated that I can't see my grandkids, and I got to figure out how we got here. And I think I'm probably the common denominator. We're never going to have that kind of experience with a narcissistic parent, but the inner child, the last part of healing, I think, is fully giving up on people who aren't good for us, giving up on their potential. Because it's like kind of like what I'm talking about right now is the potential of dysfunctional or abusive people or toxic people. Because the inner children, to their, I totally get it. Like none of us want this. We just want to have a healthy mom. We just want to be able to get through to somebody. We just want to have a healthy family. And that's that. So how to handle it is a lot of insight, a lot of psychoeducation on what are almost like to kind of give up on getting through to them. This person's not going to go to therapy. Chances are, just they're just not. And this is actually a theme in these questions today. So handling it is a lot of realization and really keeping yourself or your family or your husband kind of safe in that way. And I would say to give you all a total green light on if you've tried to get through to them, if you set boundaries and it doesn't work, if you've recommended therapy and you just get the same old shtick, you really might have to make some hard decisions. Because just like in our childhoods, this is the most important piece. How do you deal with it? Is we are exactly like we were when we were 10 years old and we have a toxic parent that we have nothing to work with. This is from my mentor. We have nothing to work with when somebody has zero insight, that just gaslights, that just turns it around on you. You got nothing to work with, so you're probably going to have to make some hard decisions. And I don't mean to say that casually. This is the hardest thing I ever did. So great question there. I hope I did it some justice. And last part of it, to really find yourself some community around others who are struggling with the same thing and making those hard decisions as well. So moving on, my parents were unavailable and often emotionally abusive, but they are also damaged humans. Can you talk about how to navigate this feeling of being hurt by their actions or inactions and feeling of sympathy for them and how they were brought up? Absolutely. You've heard the annoying therapist thing of two things being true at the same time. My father had narcissistic personality disorder, but he also had more of a horrifically unsafe childhood than I did. Those two things is really hard to reconcile with. But I tell people when you're working on yourself or going through therapy or going through some kind of healing process, you have to put the knowledge or the facts about their abuse away and just finish business with your parents about how they parented. And we look at it from the lens of therapy that I do, something called RRP, the relationship recovery process, is we're looking at it in the way, yes, these two things are true at the same time, but despite my dad's childhood, he never ever took accountability. He never considered therapy. He never considered that he was even doing anything wrong. So that's the part as his responsibility as a parent in terms of generational trauma. We got to look at those failings because within those failings is how we're going to process our stuck places. And it's a bit frustrating for me in the codependency recovery world. I'm a big advocate for 12 step. I'm a big advocate for Al-Anon and all that kind of a thing. But sometimes in therapy and in codependency recovery, or not all aspects of it, there's kind of a piece to it of that's just like, yes, that's the you needed a certain dad, but this is the dad that you got. So it's best to have compassion for them and do that. And I think that that is not a bad idea, but it needs to come at the end of doing a lot of work around our family system, because you go to therapy and you really had a horrific Thanksgiving with your alcoholic dad who has c-ptsd, and he raged at your husband and the toddler because he was blindingly drunk or whatever, and your inner child is like, oh, but my dad is like that because of the war, or my dad is like that because of this. That's not going to get you out of it. That's not there's it's just you're just, you know, people are just kind of bouncing from one reality to the another reality without sort of getting sort of to the feelings about like kind of the heartbreak that he would freak out on your husband and your child, that he would cross those boundaries and not even remember it when he woke up. So what I'm trying to say is, I think I think all of us need to spend some time really looking at what happened to us and focusing on that and processing that and healing that. Then at the end of it, you can consider what happened to your parents. So it's like a horse before the cart, or whatever that saying is. How am I doing so far? You all can hear me? We're all kind of on on task or on point or whatever. Because it's funny in these things, I just feel like I'm talking into a vacuum. We're good. All right. Do. Okay, moving on. And one piece is, sorry if I talk about these things from, if I'm not emotionally connected to the questions. It's just I'm a little bit in the day to day. I'm passionate about the recovery thing. So if I say anything that seems casual or a little bit flippant or a little bit off, I apologize about that. I do want to acknowledge the pain in all of these things. But the other piece too is that I'm just trying to kind of give you my thoughts or answer the questions and how I think about them. Let's see. Um, okay, how to balance being a family cryberry baby. So that cryberry, hold on to that, everybody. That's something that the family would say about the person. How to balance being the family crybaby or the scapegoat and standing up for myself when necessary. How do I know when to put my foot down and when to ignore it? Love this question. It's actually going to be a video that I want to do in the next 6 months. A lot of trauma survivors, raise your hand if you identify with it. Who kind of mucks up times when to stand up for yourself and times when to not? Anyone out there struggle with that? Like you get triggered and you have to tell your coworker and you might go over the top, or you have to tell your partner something, but it kind of becomes a mess in the way that you did it. Anyone relate to that out there? I think it's a big one. And when we grow up in these families, I think that the abuse is focused on two things: perception, abuse around our perception as children, like you're the reason why I cry. But the other is about abuse around power. So many inner children have this kind of not today Satan kind of I'm not gonna let the world, I'm not gonna let myself be taken advantage of. I'm not gonna, be the dunce here, or I'm not gonna be too submissive or whatever, because we're trying to wrestle out of that old power system. So how do I balance being the family crybabies and standing up for myself when necessary? How do I know when to put my foot down and when to ignore it? When it's your family, I advocate that um, it's a little bit, that's going to sound weird, but if you're trying to heal this stuff, don't get into it with your family. Try not to get through to them. Try not to prove a point. I would just sort of set your boundaries and kind of diplomatically not engage with them, because you're just going to end up frustrated and triggered. So, in other words, like, how do I put my foot down where, I don't know, like, let's just say the author of this question has a 4-year-old and they've invited mom, and mom has this toxic boyfriend, or vice versa. They've invited dad and dad has a toxic girlfriend or whatever. Is, how do I know when to put my foot down? Chances are the parents are going to be like, I'm going to ignore that my partner and my child have this really contentious relationship because my partner is not a great partner. This is a common thing that I do in my role plays. But your parent insists that they're going to bring the partner to your 4-year-old's birthday. That is about boundaries. And just to kind of, you really have to sort of, in a way, if my client was in that situation and whatever, I would just kind of really have to say, this might be the moment where you have to say, don't come if he's coming, or don't come if you're going to bring my step, like, it's just, if you're part of, like, that's a place where I would say you do put your foot down. That's about boundaries, about how it affects you. Another scenario: Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, whatever, some kind of holiday dinner, you're at the kitchen table and your toxic family engages in sort of scapegoating you via passive aggressive teasing. Who has that happen to them? Raise your hand out there in the chat. Just that, like, let's F with, the scapegoat. That's a place where to put your foot down. That's also a place you're not going to get them. This is a funny thing about this stuff. You're not going to get them to stop, but you can set a boundary in a way. This is going to sound really bizarre. In setting boundaries with difficult, dysfunctional, or toxic people, and I mean toxic with a capital T, I don't use that word lightly, is you want them to be a little bit afraid of you. And let me explain that. Back to that, you're having a meal with your family, they engage in passive aggressive teasing. And to really get your adult in place and say, you know what, if you guys just keep kind of doing these, I'm no longer going to be coming to these things. And if we can probably not, but if we can get the family to be like, oh, Patrick's so sensitive. Oh, fine, fine. That is also another triggering thing. But I would take that in a way that they're afraid of upsetting the apple cart. They don't have to get it. Why? Because they're not going to get it. I had a boss one time, the most difficult boss I've ever had in my life is, it's just sort of like, hey, I need you to not call me after hours. Like, you know what I mean? My workday stops here. And they would be like, whoa, it's so sensitive. Geez, it was just a quick call or whatever, or some kind of bullshit like that. And, they would, when I did it, it doesn't always work, but they stopped calling me after hours, but they were still a jerk about it. They were still a jerk about that, so my whole point in this question, how do I balance the family cryberry and standing up for myself, is you can set boundaries, but my big thing is don't expect them to get why. Because there's another layer of triggering that happens to our inner child, is like, I want you to stop teasing me, and I want you to understand why it's bad. I would just say, just sort of set the boundaries and see if you can get them to stop teasing. And then, like these questions, is a lot of these questions for you all is to really kind of thinking about, Are you safe in these family systems if they're behaving this way? If you're scapegoated, if you're whatever. And I'm not saying that everybody who went through childhood trauma needs to do a family cutoff, because that's definitely not true. But a lot of questions that I get are like, Patrick, I have to go to this family event. My mom is narcissistic personality disorder. My dad's a major codependent. My siblings all go to mom's rescue, and I'm the villain and whatever. And how do I go to that barbecue and be safe? And my hearing the question is a little bit like, do you hear yourself ask the question? Do you know what I mean? Because I don't have a whole bunch of like hacks or tricks about how to make that experience healthy for you. I might be able to tell you you can go and have it be tolerable, but I wouldn't want you to go. So that's a little bit, a lot of my point with a lot of these questions here is when Patrick, my partner refuses to go to therapy, and this is one of the questions here. They get really aggressive about it, whatever. What can I do to kind of get through to my partner? Is you know what I mean? You may not be able to. I know you're trying to make something work there, but that kind of a thing. There's again this idea about you don't have much to work with, but the inner child doesn't really understand that or get that. So sorry to be so kind of big about it or tough love about it, but this is just my experience with this stuff. Um, what is forgiveness to you? What is forgiveness for you? Where is this concept? Where this concept should be included in the whole process of childhood trauma? Forgiveness. The older I get, and I'm going to get a little bit political here. I'm going to get a little bit out there as a liberal progressive. Is I believe that the term forgiveness has come from in our culture has come from a religious institution focused on patriarchy. And it's okay if you don't line up with that or subscribe to that or whatever, but I want you all to think about when we were all kids growing up or whatever, where does this vague, lofty idea of forgiveness come from? And in the abusive family system, that forgiveness thing is often weaponized. So, like, well, like a father saying, well, she's your mom and she has a tough time. And I know she locked you into the bathroom and was screaming bloody murder and was threatening to kill you, but she is your mom. Do you kind of see that as a weird weapon of morality? Vice versa. You know what I mean? It's just sort of like, well, dad can't control his anger and he does lash out. And sometimes we do need to discipline by hitting, but one day you'll understand when you have kids and you'll probably forgive him then. You know, it's almost like an institution to erase somebody's emotional experience of abuse. It's another video that I kind of want to maybe get into that might be tied in with the video on religious trauma. So I'm not attacking religion and I'm not attacking these things, but we really have to look at, it's almost like you can see, I just almost see the forgiveness thing wrapped up in a lot of power, morality and power. It could be even kind of twisted a little bit in the holistic new agey, and I don't mean, I'm not crapping on them either. I'm a Reiki master, so it's, but a lot of spiritual kind of new agey stuff about forgiveness only eats you up inside is just, I don't really believe in that too. So that's that spiel there. What is forgiveness for you? I actually hate the word forgiveness. I would like to cut it up and just call it, when you've all healed in a good enough way, you are no longer interested in your own trauma story, and you're no longer interested in the connection you have with the perpetrator. You become disinterested. And I think that forgiveness, just kind of, there's going to be kind of a moving on from it. That being said, too, is just like, like when I've done a lot of work. I've been in a family cutoff with my surviving parent for half of my life now, still in that cutoff. And I'm not resentful about who they were. I'm disinterested in sort of our relationship. I'm disinterested in the abuse. You know what I mean? I might make jokes about it. I might use it as an example, but I don't toss and turn at night about my childhood or my parent or that kind of a thing. And that's my kind of version of forgiveness. I don't wish them harm. I kind of wish them well. And I see them just as an ill individual with a really, really sad life. But that comes last. And I really want to be clear about that. Meaning that if you grew up in childhood trauma and if you identify with being emotionally, physically, or sexually abused, you have the right to take as much time as you want to become healed in a good enough way and no longer interested because you've reclaimed your life. You've reclaimed partnership. You've reclaimed your body back. You have your emotions back right sized in a good enough way. You're not perfect. I did a lot of work on myself. I would still get triggered and I'm still learning in this healing process, but I feel like I've got a good solid baseline of healing going on, you know. Another thing about the disinterest is I'm no longer ruled by what my family thinks about me. There's a big difference in that as well. So forgiveness is just kind of, it's I don't know. It's just for me, it's going to sound goofy. It's like a useless word for but the main points. Um, Healing looks like we become disinterested in a good enough way because we moved on because we've healed, not moved on because you've made a choice because some rando on Facebook told you to move on. You're like, oh, I'm going to move on. Um, that kind of a thing. But forgiveness is, it can be really weaponized. It can be really about morality. But I really think it comes down to after a lot of healing, just to even just like kind of like you don't really wish your perpetrator harm. You're just like really like a really ill person, and that's the best of it. Not like this kind of kumbaya moment that isn't fully real, which a lot of people want to jump to first before they've actually done any work. So big opinions about that one. Sorry for that was like soapboxy. All right. Do you have a net where you can find professionals that work your way around the world? I am from Argentina, the land of psychoanalysis. That's kind of tricky, including my therapist who told me she can't help me because she doesn't believe in ADHD. You can go to my website. There are not many RRP therapists, but I do want you all to know that we are training therapists. We are in the middle of a research project to make RRP to be more well known, like how a therapy like say DBT or CBT becomes more empirically based, evidence based, and we're in the middle of that process. I'm planning on writing a book this year on RRP. And the best I have right now is the therapists who are listed on my website. And later this year, we're also potentially going to be putting out that website with listings of therapists who are trained in it. And to be trained in RRP is that you have to go through it yourself. And to be sort of a top tier thing, you can take some trainings in it, but for the therapists who are doing their own childhood family of origin work, they're learning the model through doing their own process. So my mentor and I is like, that's the way we would like to train our therapists, that they also have done their childhood work, which is, it's a big deal to us. So hopefully that answers that question. How am I doing? How are you doing out there in the chat? Because I'm not on the YouTube page. I'm on this other thing. We're doing okay. Breezing along. Cool. All right. Moving on. Okay. Another question. I thought by being super independent, I had outwitted my parents and their dysfunction. However, through childhood trauma work, I see that my obsessive compliance in being what they needed me to be, which was a low maintenance kid, very, very hard, very neglectful, very common. A low maintenance kid who became an adult with an avoidant attachment and depression. The defense I prided myself on centers on denial, contempt, and betrayal of myself. I realize that my parents set me up for this. Great, that's good. But I'm struggling to find a strong inner adult voice in relation to reparenting my inner child around this. Do you have any suggestions? Yes. Later in the chat, I'm going to be putting in the membership. In that membership, I did a webinar, and it's the first. It's called Reparenting Your Inner Child, where it's a full 2-hour video and a workbook on how to reparent your inner child around these things. There's also a recent video that I did about self-sabotage, which is a role play with my mentor, which kind of outlines the problem sometimes with the inner child and the inner adult because you're struggling to find a strong inner adult voice. And I also want to say, with that, you're right where you should be if you're starting to find the inner adult voice. It's a bit overwhelming because it's a lot like you have to learn how to be a parent doing the opposite of what you learned in your family system growing up. So oftentimes we don't know what to say, we don't know how to validate, we don't know how to connect, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it's a long process to getting your inner adult in place. I would also suggest trying to join a group to try to be amongst other people, like in a community of people who are doing the same thing and kind of learning. Lastly, it sounds goofy. I don't really have a book on the top of my head, but I think if you jump on Amazon and you really read a book on parenting, of parenting toddlers and young children, you get some child development in there. You might sort of get some conversation things to say that, um, when my son was born, I had already worked in childcare for a while as a nanny, and I already had experience with kids, but I just kept picking up on things on how to be a good parent. But I also learned from my mentor in my own sort of childhood trauma work about how to parent my inner child and show up from that way. Everyone is different. Sometimes the inner adult is just like, I love my inner child, I can't wait. But there can be some kind of not great responses, but are very common and they make sense for your trauma. Sometimes the inner adult does not like the inner child. They do not want the job. Why do I have to reparent myself? Or they're just simply freaked out by that kind of connecting to their heart space in that way. So I would just really check out that webinar that's on my Gumroad, and I'll put up the link. I'll put up the link in now. This is the link to the website, and then you can poke around. Everything in my membership, all the coursework is included. The webinar that I just mentioned, and you can just poke around, or you can buy the that webinar, Reparenting the Inner Child, like a la carte. So you can just check that out. Let's see. Oh, another book, a book thing, which would be really helpful too. Margaret Paul's Inner Bonding. One of the best books on inner child work. It's an older book, but I love older books. It's from the 90s, and it's genius. Did that go through? Yeah, cool. All right. All right. And I really relate to the, just like, the author of the question, defense, I prided myself on centers on denial, contempt, and betrayal of myself. I'm glad that I came back to that. How do I put this? That I find for a lot of us who struggles with self-hate out there, deep self-criticism, deep self-hate, and related to the inner adult is we have to have a loving voice, but also educate the inner child on when you're 5 years old and you're getting screamed at, or you're getting scapegoated, or you're told that you're a bad kid, which is terrifying to a small child, terrifying to any kind of child. Children start to turn the hatred onto themselves because they're too heart-based to hate the adults fully. Later in post-puberty, when we can think differently, our brain is developing differently, we can really start to dislike our parents because it's becoming apparent at that point. Our brain is shifting, and we now know at 12 and 13 that you're not going to change. But when you're 7, you're so hope-based, you're still holding out hope. You're still giving them the benefit of the doubt. And you're still buying the power dynamic of, oh, I caused those feelings in you because I'm a shitty kid. I'm a bad kid. So this is, this part is, I have it's not a great analogy, but like when we're being abused when we're 5 years old, we tend to turn the gun on ourselves because it's too scary to hate the parent. And we don't have the capacity to kind of understand that in a concrete thinking way. Because with puberty comes the ability to have abstract thinking. Yes, it's so sad, but that's where the self-hate stuff comes from. So I think that that's where it comes from. Okay. What's the best way? How are we doing on time? We're doing great. What's the best way to respond to someone who violates a boundary or pulls a guilt trip? And instead of apologizing, after not responding to it, they say it was all a misunderstanding. Example, my grandmother always guilt trips me when she wants me to call her. When I call her out, she starts crying. It is a misunderstanding. So I want to focus on the grandmother in this just to quickly educate you all. That's a very highly manipulative thing to do. Difficult people can be just trauma survivors, can be folks with personality disorders or struggling with that. They can push your buttons, and then when you have a reaction, they can bunch of things. They can gaslight you, they can turn it around on you, or they can become fragile. That's what's kind of going on here. Or playing fragile. That's what might be manipulative about it. Like someone, a parent who, like they might be just kind of passive aggressively teasing you or something like that, and they're really being abusive. And then when you kind of say like, cut it out, they go to this place of just like, I just love you, and it was just, it's just a misunderstanding, and you never get me, and like that kind of a thing. Like, what? Raise your hand if that's ever happened to you. Raise your hand if you have a parent like that, because it's horrible. It really is very, very confusing. But I see it as a sign of a pathology going on. And when you're not kind of in tune with this stuff, it just seems like reality. Really confusing. It's just like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess you just wanted to talk. I mean, your grandchild, I guess you just wanted to talk to me, like, but what happened to all that frustration about the teasing or the guilt tripping or something like that? So here's what you do. It's kind of a test for you. It's kind of a clearing the air, cutting the tension, or really calling it out. Is I have this phrase that I love, is just kind of like, grandma has that reaction. She's now crying and says it was misunderstanding. That's when I would be saying to grandma, hey, grandma, how did we get here? How did we get here right now? And it's in a video that I did. It's a role play video that I did. Let me pull that up on, I believe it was a role play that I did on borderline personality disorder. Let me see if this will come up. Yes. And a type of borderline.
Once you meet with a TurboTax expert,
gotta love those loud commercials. This is a video on something called the petulant borderline. It just means the aggressive borderline. Borderline gets a bad rap. There's quiet borderline. Dr. Romney, I believe she categorizes, there are roughly 4, I believe, from a wonderful video that she did. And the petulant is just the kind of like it's a little bit like a stereotypical what we perceive to be the borderline. Everyone is sort of different. And don't take that as every borderline person who is struggling with borderline personality disorder is like this, because that's not true. But in that video, the mother is very aggressive, very abusive, and very provocative. People can be provocative by teasing. They can be provocative. Did the thing make it did I put it in there? Yeah. And in that role play, I'm just sort of like, when the person does their healthy version or the more empowered version, how did we get here? And the grandmother might be like, what do you mean? You just don't ever call me. And that's where you find your adult. And it's a bit like, and don't keep taking on, yeah, I would only do this once. Don't keep calling her out on it. It's like, hey, grandma, we're in a pattern. You expect me to call you all the time. You never call me. Then you start to leave these little sort of guilt trippy text messages and whatever to sort of cultivate that kind of a thing, which I don't think is healthy. It's not direct. I would prefer you to say, I would love to call you, but I don't know what your schedule is or whatever, all that. There's also generational stuff or whatever. Maybe grandma doesn't text. And just, you're sort of saying how we got here in this moment is that you are crying because you're manipulating me and trying to make me feel guilty. When I ask you not to, then you fall apart and become fragile. And I don't want any of that from you. So the how did we get here is like, Grandma, you caused this upset right now, not me. You can be an adult and say, I would like to have us call every 2 weeks or whatever. Can we do, I call you one time and then you call me at the set time or whatever? So I feel like there's reciprocity. And you're probably just going to confuse her further. She might cry further. But that statement is more for you. How did we get here? You know, it's a really great phrase to use. It's a fighting phrase. You got to be prepared for that. You got to be sort of prepared for a little bit of conflict, especially when you're dealing with somebody who's struggling with a pathology, you know? And there's all different types of schools of thoughts, and every situation is different. And sometimes I advise my clients to say something like that. And other times I just know in my heart it's just going to become a mess. So you really have to make a judgment call about it. There's no hard and fast rule about this stuff. These are just suggestions. And this is a grandmother who just is, you know, guilt trips and falls apart. If you had like a highly manipulative, toxic boss that creates widespread drama in HR and there's your bonus on the line or whatever, that's not when I would suggest, how do we get here? You know? So these questions are really powerful today. I really appreciate them. Hello, Patrick. Is it normal to experience fatigue and forgetfulness during the healing process? Yes, I'm going to assume that you're kind of saying that that's a new experience for you. But yes, with, you know, let's go with that. Let's just say kind of like before people wake up to realizing how bad their childhood was. And when I got to therapy in the 90s, we had just a couple resources. We had the Judith Herman book about trauma, excuse me, and we had the Bradshaw book. That's it. You know, we didn't have all these wonderful Instagram accounts and resources and all this stuff online about it. So when I find that when people, you know, you have a this is usually the pattern. You have a bad experience with a family member, you start to look at some narcissistic abuse, you start to look at some other concepts like gaslighting, parentification, all this stuff, and you kind of go down the rabbit hole. Raise your hand if that's how you kind of got here or how you found yourself in recovery was those online videos or ideas. And when I'm trying to say that, you know, when we kind of wake up to this stuff, you might have existed in a triggered state kind of 24/7, but that might have been almost kind of working in a way. Like let's just say if someone's workaholic, high achieving, they go see their parents or whatever, and it's kind of okay, but it's still just really sad, but you're kind of in la la land about how bad it was. And then something happens and you just kind of wake up. That waking up is the beginning of a long process, I think, of really you're starting to, and the more therapy work that you do, it can sometimes feel like it's getting worse because you're digging for a lot of repressed emotions. And that really is looking at really you're, you know, I think of trauma work is really grief work. Grieving two things. We're grieving the childhood we got, the family that we got. We're also grieving the childhood we needed and the family we needed. So it's a lot on the body. It's a lot on, you know, in some ways it's almost like ignorance is bliss before we wake up because we could almost kind of muddle our way through life. But the sad thing there is that we don't have access to the full range of emotions. Before therapy, I was a very numb, shut down individual that I could not get in touch with joy or spontaneity. In good therapy, I think catharsis and doing heavy work on myself resulted in kind of getting that back in a group of really great people. But when we're digging and we're triggered, you're going to become more and more raw. And with becoming more and more raw, then there's some brain fog. There's just some really hard stuff. Your coping might go up. You might be sort of like, please don't do this, but like you're watching my videos with a bag of Oreos at 3 a.m. crying, and then you have to get you have to get up at work at 7 a.m. So like, you know, take my videos at a time when you can actually be in a place to kind of like take them in, or therapy videos or whatever. But to answer the question, is it normal to experience fatigue and forgetfulness during in the healing process? Absolutely. It's like you're shifting your brain chemistry. Your amygdala is more on fire because of that rawness, meaning in that rawness, here's when someone does group work with me, they can go from beginning a little bit shut down a year and a half into it, they're really struggling and going through the process of doing some work around their father. They're raw. And then when they go to work and they have a male at work that triggers them, it's a bit amped up. It's a, you know what I mean? So the client might come to me and just like, am I getting worse here? It's like, what is kind of going on? I'm just like, no, you're just feeling your feelings on a deeper level. And it's just really hard. It's a lot of drudgery. It's not forever, but it is hard. Um, and just even think about who remembers a major epiphany. You had a bad experience with dad and the stepmom or a parent or a sibling. You go online, you start researching, and then something says something. It just kind of hits you with a ton of bricks. Anyone have that experience? Just a life changing, like, oh my God, that's what it is. It's really that bad. That's hard on the body. It's just it's not a good time. It's wonderful in the way that now you have an answer for things that you didn't understand, or you can now name them. But now we're focusing on a new level of recovery is like, oh my God, my father's a narcissist. That's what all of that was. And then, you know, I don't keep researching narcissism when you know what it is. You've heard me kind of like say that, but I'm just kind of saying it's really, really hard. And it's not something we would sort of have kind of asked for. So, but it's just kind of like I would rather be awake and kind of going through pain than really being shut down and wanting more for life and not knowing what's wrong. You know? Hopefully that made sense. Let's see. Where am I? Oh, I believe my childhood traumas caused my borderline personality disorder and ADHD. I feel I have so much to work on. Is there hope for someone like me? Any chance I will live in peace someday? Thank you so much for all the help that you're providing. Yes, there is hope. Do you know what I mean? In a way, I just think to honor you and to honor what's kind of going on. If you're struggling with borderline personality disorder, there are these double whammies. I'm not saying one person's childhood trauma is more than the other, but there are some double whammies. Like the double whammy of growing up in an unsafe environment and struggling with autism, or growing up in a toxic family who's also really engaged in a toxic religion. Double whammy. I grew up in a pretty abusive household, but I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't have an extra thing that I needed to deal with. So what I'm trying to honor here is, yes, there is hope for you. It is possible to recover. It's just you're dealing with two things. You're dealing with what happened to you growing up, and then sort of the borderline, whether that is sort of like, I think more research is pointing to that is a genetic, it's more of a nature thing, but then you have some nurture messing up underneath it. So that's what I mean by the double whammy. To live in peace someday, just keep plugging away at it. Just keep plugging away, and you might not like it, but I think that DBT skills are amazing as a good solid baseline to get in charge of first. If you are responsive to medications that help you out, great. I would get some things under place first before diving into doing some trauma work and working with a person who knows what's kind of going on with you, so that because the work itself is going to be extra triggering because of that double whammy. Hopefully I've honored that question, and hopefully I'm making sense there. So I've learned that this year I have had a difficult time setting boundaries in relationships since growing up with childhood abuse and neglect. I have asked my husband of 15 years to go into counseling on his own, but for what I perceive to be narcissistic qualities. I just mentioned the behaviors that impacted me directly to him, and didn't call him a narc. Good. He said he would, but hasn't done anything about it yet. It's been over a month. I told him how I feel about it, and that if his issues could have been remedied by himself, they would have by now. Okay, so what should be my next step? I know I am trauma bonded and working on distancing myself emotionally from his outbursts and insults when they occur. Leaving will put me in a bad situation financially, unfortunately. Okay. It's a very common problem. I don't want to get so much into the gendered stuff about the question. This is really sort of like I'm assuming like a cisgender relationship going on with, um, you're in therapy or you're in tune in therapy and the partner isn't. It's actually, um, these questions, I'm not picking on the question. I'm not picking on the author. I get this question so much. The question makes me upset in the way that, upset in the way that we are bonded with our partner. In some ways, we love our partner. We have kids with our partner. We have this life that we've built with our partner. We have both emotional stuff and financial stuff, and I get all that kind of stuff. But when we get into these relationships and we get into these marriages, and coming back to this idea of when we wake up or whatever, is we're seeing that the person either has trauma or issues and they're not taking the bait, they're not doing it. So when I would just be focusing and really start to tackle your own codependency first, and I don't really have great answers in this. There's nothing that drives me more up the wall. And I don't know, I'm not trying to take his side, I'm not trying to take your side. You know what I mean? Like in a way that another piece to this is, and I'm just probably going to be annoying a little bit of devil's advocate. Sometimes our partners can trigger so much that we're looking at narcissism in our family system, and then everything becomes narcissism. Everything. So in some ways, there's also you in your triggers as well. But I also want to honor that distancing myself emotionally from his outburst and insults when they occur. So I'm saying also, I believe you, you know, I probably just contradicted myself there. Really focus on codependency. Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. Look into some Al-Anon groups online. Find a really good therapist that gets this kind of stuff, that kind of a thing. But really, in my heart, what this usually comes down to is, um, people struggling with this eventually have to make a decision about kind of staying, and that might mean to live in quiet desperation and giving up on yourself and giving up on the kind of, partnership you want, or the kind of emotional experience, the kind of intimacy you want. Giving up on that or leaving. Because I think, like I said earlier, is there's nothing worse than working on yourself and then having those around you where it's like your family or your partner where you have nothing to work with. When and I'm probably going to frustrate you further, is I'm so opinionated on this. I'm not taking anybody in my practice right now. I'm not opening up any groups. But when I was doing couples work, eventually I started to have a rule that if I was going to take a couple on, and I really want you all to pay attention to this, this is my point here. If I was going to take a couple on, I would really make sure and say, okay, if you want to do some work with me, you both have to be interested in looking at your childhood trauma and be aware of your childhood trauma. Because I'm not going to do one person gets it and the other person doesn't acknowledge anything wrong with their family or anything happened to them at all. It's just a hard and fast rule that I kind of came up with, because I would have so many couples where one person is actually working really hard on things and aware of things. And I'm not trying to say good guy, bad guy, but then just the other one is really, really shut down to the reality of their own family system. And it becomes this narrative of that the person who is shut down to their family system, they're just kind of along for the ride. And there's a video that I did, on types of, you could just type in types of, trauma couples, where I talk about this stuff, types of that, with some advice there. Hopefully that was making sense. We got a good 30 minutes or something like that. Let's see if we can get through all these questions. Where was I? Okay. Another husband question. My husband suffers from a deep sense of something is wrong with him when he makes mistakes. We have very low contact with his mother for a few years, but it feels like her influence is somehow baked in. Good word there, baked in, to how he feels about himself. What can I do or say as a spouse to encourage and support him to view himself as kindly as he views others? really hard. And what can you do? You're probably doing everything already. And in a way, this is coming back to codependency here is I get a lot of questions about Patrick, I have my partner is really shut down and doesn't really get this stuff. I forward them your videos, but they never watch them. How do I get them to watch the video? And it's a codependent question because the person's inner child is saying, how do I make them get it? Anytime, going to try to be funny here. Anytime any of us or how do I get them to get it? You're screwed. Whatever scenario comes up in that way, and I think that that is sort of almost the definition of codependency. I need you to it's not bad to want to get things to get it, but when your inner child is on a mission to have them get something, it's probably a trigger back to your own parents trying to get through to them. That's just a side note. I'm not taking that from the author's question. The question is just how do I be a better spouse? But when you have a spouse, it's a bit like having a spouse. It's not the same, but has anyone ever been married to an alcoholic or in a relationship with an alcoholic? Anyone had a parent who was an alcoholic? And what is so hard about that dynamic is as an adult child of an alcoholic, to us, the answer is clearly in front of us. Clearly, like your life would get better and our marriage would get better and our family would get better if you just stop effing drinking. If you just go and just learn about, and whatever. And the person is in a headspace of later for that, or it's not that bad, or get off my back, or I just had a couple pops. I don't know what the big deal is. Just so what if it's the seventh car that I've wrapped around a tree and put everyone's life in danger? Shit happens, like it's kind of a little bit like that, where what I, my answer to this question is that probably clearly to you is that your husband needs therapy and his no adult present and the inner child is still doing what he did in childhood is just, if I ignore it, it'll go away. And that's just a really, really hard place to be in. So I can't really give you a hard and fast answer to it, but I will say, um, Codependent No More. Melody Beattie is the author of that book, Some Al-Anon. And, in a way is just kind of like, I want you also to think about what can you say to encourage him is I would say that somebody needs to be, I think your husband really needs to be more focused on what happened to him growing up, because anything you say is just going to be like a nice affirmation to him. And affirmations don't work unless we're talking about childhood. Affirmations. I'm smart enough. I'm a good person. I have good things to offer in this world. It goes in one ear and out the other, unless we have that in context of growing up. I have good things to offer in this world, but that was not true growing up because I was a scapegoated kid and my parents didn't like me because they were a-holes. That's different. That's a very different, like, reality, heart-based kind of statement. So anything you kind of say to him, it's just going to be kind of like, that's nice. And his inner child's going to be like, yeah, I don't believe you, but I don't really want any help. So sorry if I'm reading too much into that question. I really appreciate these questions. And sorry, I really wish I had a different set of answers. I really wish I had a kind of like oh yeah, just kind of say this and say that, go up 2 streets and take a right, maybe sit down, take him out to lunch and kind of like, really kind of like, share with him or something like that. You could do that as well, but I'm just kind of saying I don't really have, these are hard questions for hard situations, and I don't really have life hacks about it. I know that you're not asking for life hacks, but the questions are hard and the answers are hard, I think is what I'm trying to say. Okay, how we doing? Plenty of questions to go. Where was I? Okay. How can I start to open up to people again when I've been so closed up? My fortress is impenetrable by now. I have over 50 people in my extended family, but not one person has come to help me with my childhood abuse, which is still ongoing. I believe I'm a very kind person by nature, but childhood trauma has changed me into someone just very cold and distant. Like in my freelance job as a healthcare assistant, um, I am able to ensure and anticipate my needs of my patients, but it's very hard for me to be truly warm. Powerful question. I would say just a couple quick things is that in childhood trauma, we get our hearts broken. And part of healing is fixing that so that we can sort of have a functioning kind of heart again. And there's plenty, billions of brokenhearted people on this planet, including those struggling with personality disorders or whatever, Um, and that way we can we can look at it from a compassionate lens. Um, I would recommend therapy. I would recommend being around other people and slowly building a window of tolerance. 12-step can be really, really good about that. 12-step has issues that you've heard me all kind of talk about in videos and stuff like that, but it's a free resource to really be around people struggling with similar ailments. Al-Anon, ACOA. You can go to ACOA and not be an alcoholic or not have an alcoholic parent. Um, to just start there. But absolutely, I think that, like I said earlier in this thing, before I got into therapy, I was extremely numb, extremely shame based, and I was a nervous wreck. If you picture like Beaker from the Muppets, who only felt anxiety and then not much else, and it's not you. What the author is sort of saying, you're probably freaked out by that coldness, and we have to reframe that and from a place of like, look what was done to you instead of who you are as a person. How can you start to open up to people again when you've been so closed up? Is like that's the nature of having childhood trauma. And this might be the best way to answer this question is it's intimacy that we got traumatized by. It's those relationships with those people is what caused the trauma. And that's the bad news. And I think the hard news on top of that is it's also going to be relationships and intimacy that's going to heal the trauma. Self healing is all fine and good. I think it's cool, but it's some way you're not going to come out of a room after reading all the books and watching all the videos and doing all the coursework and still be, you're still going to need a human element in that. A therapist, a group, someone that can be a witness to you to about how bad it was and touch on that heart space. And hardest thing I ever did was to be vulnerable around other people. Um, but that's really how I kind of healed. So that's me. I'm not sort of saying this is the only way that people can heal. Like it's just like that's just my experience and that's just my opinion. And again, I'm not taking away the idea of self-healing. So many people don't have access to therapy, access to a group. So I want to be sensitive to the fact I'm conflicted in saying go to therapy and go to group and do all those things or find a good therapist. It's just that easy. I know it's incredibly expensive and not available and difficult. It doesn't even exist in your country. And I get that. But it's just still the experience of kind of how I did it. So in a way, if people are asking, I guess if you guys were just simply asked, like, Patrick, we're all diabetic. What do I do? Do you know what I mean? Like the answer, the treatment's going to be sort of like the same thing. It's probably a really bad analogy, but okay. Moving on. How do you manage anxiety around what the future will look like? This is a powerful question. Everyone kind of like perk up your ears with this one. It's a doozy. How do I manage anxiety around what the future will look like once I go no contact? Oh, my heart just breaks for you. I'm worried about retaliation and losing other family members in the process, especially their presence at special events like wedding, in future and grandchildren's life. Trying to say this as gently as I can. Part of the ingredients in going no contact is weird retribution from your family. It is a line in the sand and losing people in your family. It is a weird, awkward presence when you have to go to your cousin's wedding and see your sister who was all about mom and mom's cut off or whatever. All of that is kind of what comes with going in no contact. So I just want to like, that's the things to expect. And I might trigger you all. I might trigger the author by saying this. And it's a little bit like the inner child is so terrified of that stuff. We kind of need to say to our inner adult, so what if all that happens? It's probably going to happen. And let's just say, totally different scenario. Let's just say you made a mistake at work and your boss and your supervisor and the person from HR or whatever, or that they want to have a meeting with you, going to cause a lot of anxiety. And your inner child is just, and it's like it was a mistake that wasn't your fault. And if a client was coming in with that problem, they're going to be really triggered about it. They're going to be really anxious about it. And let's just say that they're like, Patrick, what if they don't believe me? I just can't tolerate it if they don't believe me that it was just something that kind of happened because I wasn't kind of getting support. And I would say, given what you've told me about them before and how jerky they all are, they're probably not going to believe you. And it's like, so what? And the so what is behind that is that, so what if they do? They're probably going to do. But just because they do that doesn't make you a bad person. Because inner children, who is out there is terrified about what other people think about them? Who would be terrified to walk into that meeting and be like, well, Jill, we all know why you're here, and we just don't know what happened with the Johnson account. We've lost $15,000, and we just want to. Wow, we just want to. And if they don't really hear you out, if they don't sort of take it in, that doesn't change the fact that it was a mistake not done by you. It doesn't change the fact that you are a good person. Here's the kicker in that. So what if people misunderstand us? So what? I get all kinds of comments every day, you know what I mean? Maybe from all your family members, like, you're just tearing people apart. And what's wrong with you with all these cutoffs and just woke liberal BS? And, just like sort of like, is it always the parents' fault? And I'm like, are you even a parent? That's the one that kind of gets me. Are you even a parent? And I just have to remind myself, it's just like, sort of like, so what if they misunderstand me? They're probably not they're not probably not no intention on understanding me anyway. So that idea about so what, it's kind of a phrase. It's not to judge you, it's to kind of make you a little bit more sober that, it's almost like the author of this question is saying, if my family is toxic and I go no contact, what happens if they do toxic things? It's they're toxic. That's their shtick. They're gonna. And the less power that you give that, the easier it will be. And going no contact, I don't mean to say this stuff lightly. It's just like sort of hardest thing I ever did in my life. It's both the most crushing, devastating thing I ever did, but it was also the greatest thing I ever did in terms of my recovery and getting myself back and getting right size with myself. So a lot of this stuff and all of these questions are going to be choosing one discomfort for another discomfort, but choosing the better discomfort that's going to get you somewhere. If it was an alcoholic, like, well, you can continue drinking and you can run your life into the ground and continue to be terrified and continue to lose people around you and continue to lose your health and your jobs and that kind of a thing. Or you can go hang out with people in a church basement, non-denominational, and talk about your drinking in AA. Both of those are not great options, is what I'm trying to say. But one of those is a way out. So I get all fired up with that one. All right. How are we doing on how are we doing on time? We got another few 20 minutes or so. We'll go up to around 5. Love that question. A question on being parentified. Does having to go to church every Sunday with my twin sister from 8 years old and look after our brother 3 years old and keep him quiet, keep him well behaved while our parents stayed at home? I've heard a lot of stuff. I haven't heard this before. Okay, that's a new one for me. Does that sound like one example that could point to childhood trauma? Especially weird. When asking our mother why, she said that they wanted us to make up our mind if we would choose faith or not. It's absolutely childhood trauma. An 8-year-old, somebody help me out. In the United States, 8 years old, is that 3rd grade? Is that 4th grade, 3rd grade, or around there? Who has a child who's 8 years old? What grade are they in? Um, it's absolutely childhood trauma because, as an 8-year-old, there's so many layers to this question. First of all, you're parentified because you're watching a 3-year-old. No, it's not medieval times anymore where it's like the 8-year-old is the adult of the house. And I'm not trying to be facetious or judgy there. An 8-year-old watching a 3-year-old going to church alone with concepts that are scary and that you don't really quite understand might be nice community. There might be cookies and the after thing or whatever. But the fact that you're without parents blows my mind in that. And I'm judging your parents. I'm not judging the author. This other element of when you asked why later in life, why she did that, they wanted you to make up your mind if you wanted to choose faith. Okay. Let's just a side note, and I'm really going to get on a soapbox about this one is, I really want you all to think about this is sometimes lazy parenting can get wrapped up in a magnanimous story. And that's what I think is kind of going on here. Again, lazy parenting can get wrapped up in a magnanimous story. Neglectful parenting, off parenting, that kind of a thing. And I'm not trying to trigger anybody. It's just like sort of like here's what I mean by that is just if someone said to their mother or father, like, well, hey, dad, we were like 11 and 12. Like, why did you allow us to watch those sexy movies? And almost they were like, a lot of that stuff was pornographic or whatever. And for the father to say, like, well, hey, I was at work and you were going to learn it from somewhere. Do you guys see the laziness in that? Do you see the not protection in it? But wrapped up in some swagger, wrapped up in a narrative that I was a cool parent or I was, because it's just like that the fact that she said that, they wanted you to make up your mind is that just smells really BSy to me. Here's why is I would say I wonder if they just wanted the house to themselves. And that may not be the case. Maybe they were really thinking like, oh, you need to experience church and make those decisions. But the thing is that is for developmentally, that's for an 18-year-old. That's for a 16-year-old. If you're say a Catholic, New England family, American family, but you're pretty like you don't want to force religion on your kids, and you start to when would you start to if you were that kind of family, when would you introduce religion to your child to really understand the concepts and the nuances and the how do you understand the abstract stuff to that? I would say like around 16, 15 years old, if they're even interested. 18. And I think that would be sort of healthy, but I don't buy it at 8 years old to take the 3-year-old out and go do all that. Just sounds like weird babysitting, knowing, and they would know where you would be in church. So sorry to be kind of, a little bit, like I'm affected by the question because of course it's abuse and I'm not trying to judge you into not knowing that. I'm upset at your parents for you, for the author of that question, because that's a lot. And you've all heard me talk about the blatantly abusive family. Yes, church is not meant for children. I agree with that too. It's just a concept that comes later, I believe. And I'm sure people are going to come at me for that. What was I going to say? The blatant family and the tricky family. The blatant family is the loud stuff, plates being thrown against the wall, affairs between the parents, physical abuse, loudness, violence, chaos, poverty. This might be, I don't know the person's story, but this would fall under the tricky stuff, the mind effy stuff, where we went, because it's almost like if someone asked you at 20 what kind of home life you have, like, well, we went to church. You know what I mean? Like my parents made, decisions, or they were pretty forward thinking that they wanted us to figure things out on their own. And you know what I mean? Like this would fall more into a tricky family kind of a thing. But I'm just pulling that out from the question. The example is tricky, but I don't know if it was loud at home. Okay. How do I not get triggered? Moving on to another question. How do I not get triggered when my abusers criticize or shame me in a subtle way? Okay. There have been only very few moments when my abusive parents were overt with their mistreatment, and it's always an indirect jab. For example, they know I didn't know how to cook in my teen years and would ask me, "So, what's your favorite dish to cook?" I felt like they were making fun of me, but it was delivered in a simple question and it drove me insane. And I still don't know how to respond to those indirect jabs. I don't really know how to answer this, just other than to validate. Tricky families can be extremely sneaky. And the jabs are huge because they tell a bigger story. And in the toxic family, who went through stupid stuff like this? You're 11 years old and you burnt a grilled cheese, and then the family always brings up the grilled cheese every time they see you cooking or something like that. They just, oh, it's just an amazing example again to talk about how Mike burnt his grilled cheese sandwich and Goofy Mike, and oh, the house smelled. And it's like the first stupid story that they tell when you introduce a spouse to them. And in sessions with me, when someone is like that with that jabby, tricky family kind of a thing, a lot of our families are just button pushers. Anyone relate to that? They just it's almost like my family was also a button pusher rooted in sarcasm. So it was really jabby. I grew up in that. When I left home and worked in different situations, I would just be as sarcastic and jabby, and people were like, "Whoa." And that was a culture shock for me because it was the first time people were like, "Wow, you're kind of intense and kind of provocative." They didn't say it that way, but that was their reaction. Um, so, I mean, I'm trying to say here that I believe you because it's like the questions they ask don't feel good. In a healthy family system, this comes from a book called Healthy Parenting. You can look this up. Janet, whoop. Okay. She has these top 10 rules that what a healthy family system does and then what a toxic family system does. And one of the favorite ones on there, she says something like, in a healthy family system, there's organization and planning. Um, and in an unhealthy family system, there is chaos. And then when there isn't chaos, they create chaos. There's also another one on there that in a healthy family system, parents raise the children to the best of their ability. And in an unhealthy family system, um, children raise themselves and are often criticized for it. So coming back to that grilled cheese thing is, you know, this is classic my family. If I burnt the grilled cheese and they would never let it go, I would feel like just a dumb kid or carry that on. Or worse, kind of like in later in life, like, oh, I messed up the grilled cheese and not really be vocal about it, or that kind of a thing. But nobody was showing me and parenting me around how to cook in a kitchen and spending that time with me. Who relates to that? Who relates to, like, you're 17 years old and you run out of gas like every 17-year-old would when you first start driving, and then you're either raged at or screamed at, but no one ever sort of said, here's how you do it. It's two things going on there. In a healthy family system, given how kids are, they're gonna run out of gas. And I often I often talk about this, because it's kind of, we don't tease him about it, but my son, who's 11, when he goes to take a shower, he never remembers to grab a towel from the linen closet directly across from the bathroom. Just will never really remember. So it's just, what I'm trying to say there is, like, he's he's been at it for a long time taking showers on his own, but I'm trying to say kids need so much repetition and they need so much help. So in this question, how do I not get triggered when my abusers criticize me and shame me in a subtle way? A, I wouldn't be really around them if they did. Or I would really start to set some hard and fast boundaries. And coming back to that other question is like, you want them to be a little bit afraid of you. Oh, Patrick's so sensitive about the cooking thing. I'm not going to say anything, like I don't need them to get it. I just do need them to shut the bleep up. But in therapy, I would be really looking at, a lot of us just don't quite get, that's why I love that Wojt's book. A lot of us just don't get what happens in a healthy family system. And in a healthy family system, kids are shown how to flip a grilled cheese without burning it and not shame them for it. That's really my point to this. A 17-year-old is sort of like, remember, look at the gas tank because I don't want you on the side of the highway. And then they end up on the side of the highway. And then the parent, it's a pain in the ass, but the parent goes and picks them up anyway, understanding that they're 16 or 17 years old. And every moment is a learning experience. That's the healthy family system stuff, Who was the oldest child and you're 8 years old and you're raged at because the dishes weren't done? And the house is a mess because you were watching two toddlers. Coming back to the other question. Anyone be that parentified? Definitely not how a healthy family system would do it. A healthy family system would recognize the developmental needs, what a kid can handle, all that kind of stuff. But chances are in these family systems, the root element to all this stuff is shame and lack of of parents knowing what they're doing. Meaning they shame the kids for it without actually being self-parents. It's just like sort of like everything from the grilled cheese to the gas to you getting married or you buying a house and not understanding how that works. And it's just the family's like, oh, just another opportunity to make fun of you. We didn't show you anything, but we're definitely going to kick you when you're down. That's really kind of what I mean by that. All right, couple more quick ones. What ways can one cope with their spouse's parents' toxic traits if they don't feel like they can put up the same boundaries as they can with their own parents? I really think if you're in a marriage, what ways can one cope? You're kind of doing this solo because your partner isn't on, you and your partner are not on the same page about toxic parents. I would really try to find a good couples therapist and become on the same page. So when two people are married and they come from both from toxic family systems, when one person has set the boundaries with their own parents, but the other parent the other spouse kind of doesn't, it's really kind of a mess. So in a way, we need our spouse to be able to set boundaries and say, okay, we're coming to Thanksgiving, but we have a long drive. We have a bunch of people to see. We can't stay for the whole thing. And it's the spouse whose parents are the parents who do the pushback or something toxic or whatever. I think it's really their responsibility to figure out how to set the boundary and be assertive and be forthright there instead of somebody else kind of doing it for them or whatever. So I really wish I had a better answer for this one. Ways one can hope when your spouse's parents' toxic traits, and if they don't feel like they can put up the same boundaries, it's just really, really hard. I really don't have a great answer to that other than it's a bigger issue. I find that couples, with kids or whatever, and dysfunctional families, the more that you are on a team in the same page, the easier everything gets. That's also true when you have young kids. The more that you're on the same page about that kind of a thing, because having young kids as childhood trauma survivors is extremely triggering. Like, and I know I'm hijacking this, taking to it in every direction, but let's just say you're pretty passive with your kids and your partner gets visibly upset with them or just frustrated with them in a healthy way. And then your inner child starts to see them as the perpetrator. You're not on the same page. There's a lot of trauma stuff flying around the room. And hopefully couples therapy would be helpful. Let's see. Probably just a quick one. The last one here is, hi, I'm a therapist too. I enjoy your videos. I'm curious if you can describe your approach once we acknowledge trauma. Sure. RRP, the relationship recovery process, was developed by my mentor, Amanda Curtin. and really has two goals with a bunch of activities it's done in a group setting, ideally done in a group setting. Individual is helpful, but it's really a group psychotherapy model. The first goal is finishing business with our family of origin, telling the truth in psychotherapy, telling our family story, holding our parents accountable, doing a whole bunch of experiential work to address the trauma, go towards the trauma, finish business with that family system. That really sort of means make a decision about whether your family was right about you, and then do that work so much that your inner child gets it as well. That's the first goal. The second goal is reclaiming intimacy, doing conflict work, um, being able to be assertive without being too much, being able to be assertive without being too little, intimacy work, letting people know about how they impact you. And it's funny, but doing conflict work is actually what got me to be where I am today, and to be able to not be so shame based and allow myself to be vulnerable, and to just simply also learn the skills about how do you have a back and forth when there's conflict going on instead of shutting down. So that's where the group stuff kind of comes in. That's really kind of a quick thing about it. So, well, that's pretty much about it. Excuse me. Just a couple more things. If you like this, if you wanted to, to start to do some work, as I mentioned before, I offer a membership. How many people are on this thing right now? How many of you are out there? Wow, 700. Floored. That is incredible. Thank you so much for being here. Let's see. If you wanted to start to do some work, I run a membership community where we meet twice a month in live Q&As like this that are a bit more interactive. Let me find my notes. I'll put the membership in the chat. So it's 2 live Q&As just like this on Wednesdays, twice a month. You also get an email from me every Monday about inner child work and journal prompts. Those are deeper journal prompts. If I put out a video, the journal prompts are going to be related to that video, as well as what else is you have all access to the coursework. There's the Genogram Family Rules, a bunch of webinars on there, and webinars that come up are also included in that membership. I'm going to be doing a webinar on what happens when we have an abusive parent pass away, or we have to become a caretaker for them. It's a question that I often get, and I'll be running a 2-hour webinar and worksheet and doing some work around that in the coming months. And right now, I believe there is only 15 seats left for the membership, which would bring us up to about 500 members. After that, I need to develop a way for there to be more capacity. So I'm going after that. I'm going to a waiting list after the 500 is met. I just put a code in. This is a 15% off code, that REX thing for the membership. You can sign up, monthly. You can sign up annually. What a lot of people do is they sign up for the month and they see if they like it. They see if it works for them. There's a whole community afterward. When we do the live Q&A, that's on literally a Zoom meeting. It's not recorded. It's anonymous. It's intimate. It's an hour and a half long of questions. And then I get off the call and other people continue and have a sense of community there. I love it. I love doing it. It's like profound that we're coming up on 500 members. And I'll put that code in again. That's the 15% off code. Here is the membership. Do you guys have any questions about the membership? If you want to just real quickly ask me about them, put them in the chat. There's also going to be an archive of the journal prompts that go out. I've started this thing in May. So right now there's about 50 PDFs of journal prompts related to inner child work. And those are going to be listed as well by topic. Like, what do you want in your recovery? Unfinished business with our parents. Self-sabotage, like I mentioned, they're put out with the video that I put out. And that's about it. Does it cost anything? Yes, there is a monthly fee. It's $69.99 per month, $4.99 in the annual. It recurs every monthly, so it's going to be like your Netflix. It's a subscription. So you have to, if you only want to try it out for a month, sign up and you can kind of cancel and you'll still get all the things if you don't want it to accrue again. Yeah, and that's it. You can also, if you like this, there's also a chat feature if you want to support the channel. There's a little money sign down there for a super thanks if you find this to be helpful. The money that goes into there goes into the time, it goes into the videos, it supports to keep the channel kind of going for me. Really appreciate that. And yeah, any kind of last couple questions before I log off? Please keep doing this. Absolutely. Okay. Love you, sir. Yep. Well, I loved having you all. I really love this community. I love that you're all trying. And again, I want to sort of say, um, I feel it too when I suggest things. You need a couples therapist or an individual or a group or something like that. I do understand it's not available, and I feel a little bit of guilt for suggesting those things, whether it's about a money issue or an access issue, or simply just not enough trained therapists out there. And it's kind of a bitch. So, but just keep your hopes up, keep trying, and it's perfectly good enough if you can't get access to that to just do the self work that you're doing. The membership is a good thing to supplement that. I don't think it's an absolute perfect replacement for psychotherapy, but it's good enough. And yeah, I hope you all have a lovely weekend. I'm going to sign off. It's good to chat with you all. I wish I could see you all, but there's that. Have a beautiful weekend, and I will see you soon. I'm going to stop. Bye bye.